Dorothy, were the clues all there for the BBC about this particular act? They took to the stage just before kneecap, and we're all well aware that people have been on high alert for that particular group. Bob Vylan came out on stage just before. Were the BBC taking the right measures, or were they too focused on one particular band and not applying all of this to all of the acts at Glastonbury?
I mean, you said it yourself, the clues were all there. A cursory look online tells you that this man has said that he likes upsetting people. He had made radical statements about Israel, which is his right in a free country, but that should have warned them that he was quite likely to say something very radical, and therefore I would not have streamed him live, just as they didn't stream Kneecap live. And the impression one gets is that Glastonbury was looked after by teams who knew about music when they needed somebody who understood politics, because anybody who understood politics would have looked through that programme and done a bit of due diligence about all the acts to see which ones should not be screened live. And then once they had started streaming him live, the moment that he called for people to be killed, and it doesn't matter who they are, that's wrong, they should have pulled that feed and just gone to another feed. You work at Sky, I worked at Channel 4 and ITV. We do that the whole time. And then their third big mistake was when they'd made the other mistakes, they didn't apologise for it for hours and hours and hours. They kept saying that they had put a warning up on the screen about potential discriminatory language. Well, you can't just warn people about discriminatory language. You cannot have unchallenged discriminatory language on a television service.
The BBC has apologised and said that the language is unacceptable. That performance by that group no longer available on its iPlayer services. What do you think the end point of this is? Is an apology enough? A resignation? What happens next on this?
Well, the first thing that will happen is that the regulator will hold an investigation. The BBC can hold its own investigation. And may I say that's one of the other things about the BBC. They have these investigations, they seem to go on forever, and we often never hear what the result is of the investigation. So I'm not interested in BBC investigations. The police are investigating. Was there potentially an unlawful act here? That is a different issue. Mm-hmm. But this was about the most basic procedural errors. So I hope the BBC won't launch a big inquiry into what new procedures it should have. You know what they need is they need a bit of common sense.
What would you have done if you were in the hot seat right now, Dorothy, as a former ex-head of news and current affairs? What would you be putting into action today? Be interested to know.
Well, I would be doing an immediate inquiry as to what went wrong, definitely. I would have put out an apology much more quickly. I would also make whoever was responsible come out and do interviews. We need to see Samir Shah or Tim Davies come out and hold themselves accountable instead of these mealy-mouthed statements from anonymous sources.
Joshua, there were so many different parts in this, so many players involved, if you like. The BBC, Glastonbury itself, the festival, who gave the band the platform. The act, of course, and the crowd as well. The crowd chanting along, chanting back, sharing videos on social media of that performance if they were there. Can we start first by talking about the act? Avon and Somerset Police, that video evidence is going to be assessed by officers. That's been confirmed by the head of the Metropolitan Police today to determine whether any offences may have been committed that would require a criminal investigation. We're talking about a hate crime here. What would the police be looking at to determine if a hate crime was committed?
They will be looking at Section 18 of the Public Order Act, and that says that a person who uses threatening, abusive or insulting words or behaviour or displays any written material which is threatening, abusive or insulting is guilty of an offence if he intends thereby to stir up racial hatred, or having regard to the circumstances, racial hatred is likely to be stirred up thereby. So this is an offence aimed at an individual. In this case, Pascal Robinson Foster is the person presumably under investigation. He's the person accused of making these remarks that are said to have broken the law. So that's the first stage. Then, of course, there's the question of whether the broadcaster, the BBC, was also likely to have stirred up racial hatred by broadcasting this and by not pulling the plug. And you mentioned the crowd, and that's a significant thing because, as I see it, you've got to look at the performance as a whole. You've got to look at the way in which the crowd reacted. You've got to look at the way in which the performers egged on the crowd, responded to the crowd, spoke to the crowd. And you've got to decide on the basis of that whether it was likely that racial hatred was stirred up, whether it was expected that racial hatred would be stirred up. So those are quite difficult tests. You've got to look at the evidence, you've got to look at the law, you've got to look at past cases. But certainly, I think there is something for the police to get their teeth into, and I'm sure they'll seek advice from the Crown Prosecution Service on this.